Our guest today is Pat Fong Kushida. It's AAPI Strong. AAPI Stop the Hate. AAPI stands for Asian American Pacific Islanders. AAPI Strong is a national initiative that seeks to address hate-related incidents against Asian American Pacific Island citizens. 38% of all hate-related incidents are directed at AAPI and small businesses. Pat Kushida graduated from Sac State in 1985 and is currently the president and CEO of both the Sacramento and the California Asian Pacific Chambers of Commerce. Her strength is in forming collaborations with many community-based organizations on issues related to regional economic development to advance their community interests. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kushida. Pat, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Dave, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. I just want to thank you for inviting me to speak today as part of your ongoing educational forum series. The Renaissance Society and its members play such a critical role in elevating important and relevant issues facing our communities, and so I'm just very appreciative of your work and your commitment to ongoing education. So, I've served in my capacity as president and CEO of the Chamber since 1998. So I'm literally the oldest living Chamber executive in history. And I formed the statewide entity in 2010. We're the largest ethnic chamber here in California and represent the interests of over 600,000 AAPI-owned businesses. The sad events of this past year, unfortunately, have exposed a toxic and persistent form of racism that has plagued Asian Americans for generations. And it started with an administration that talked about the pandemic as the China flu back in January of 2020. It seems like today's headlines are a repeat of history. In 2020 and 2021, Asian hate, Black Lives Matter, Mexican families separated at the border. Enshrined in our Constitution is the belief that all persons are created equally and are entitled to equal treatment under the law, regardless of race, creed, or color. But the gap between the words of our Constitution and what America delivers can be enormous, and that gap can feel enormous to people of color. Treated equally. If history has taught us anything, those two words, treated equally, remain elusive for many of our marginalized citizens. A nation of immigrants, all of us are descendants of foreigners except Native American Indians. And yet history has shown us over and over again, under the guise of patriotism, that those who purport to love America echo an age-old fear that a nation carved out of wilderness will be lost forever to strangers. Supremacy of any kind is based not only on fear and racism, but also on economics. In 1818, the Chinese were discriminated against because white America felt that Chinese laborers were taking away jobs from them. And what is forgotten is that these Chinese laborers were brought over in mass during the gold rush to help build the transcontinental railroads that brought about the U.S. Industrial Revolution. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 barred all Chinese laborers and all Chinese immigrants from naturalized citizenship as a way to send back those Chinese laborers once they were no longer needed. That ban lasted until 1943, 61 years. Now, the causes of racism and the notion that somehow Black, brown, and yellow-skinned are less of a people, deserve less, and should accept less is unfortunately rooted in the founding of America. And despite our many astonishing advances in the 21st century, we have allowed the dark specter of racism to continue. As a first-generation Chinese American whose parents immigrated to this country to provide a better future for my brothers and sisters, I know all too well the sting of racism. I remember in fourth grade being taunted by a classmate for being Chinese and was accused of not being an American and go back to China where I belong. And my husband's father, who's a first-generation Chinese American, told us the story of how he was beaten up at the age of 16 while walking home from school and told to go back to Japan after his family's release from a Japanese internment camp. We believe that combating racism requires an aggressive approach in addressing policies and practices that institutionalize racism. So I'm here today to ask all of you to stand in solidarity with us, to support our AAPI-owned businesses, and to stand up to combat anti-Asian violence. And that's why discussing this national initiative with you today, AAPI Strong, is such an important effort. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to be here today. And Chris, please play the video.
"2020 was an unprecedented year for the virus, the flare-ups of anti-Asian discrimination, and the desperate search for economic recovery. Asian American small businesses, especially the mom-and-pop restaurants, were among the hardest hit by the economic downturn brought on by the pandemic and xenophobia. Of the 10,000 AAPI businesses recently surveyed by the Federal Reserve, 78% reported a decline in revenue, and 46% had reduced their staff. Nearly 90% of these small businesses said sales have yet to return to pre-pandemic levels. While everyone worldwide was dealing with the same challenges of a serious pandemic, AAPIs around the country were being verbally abused and physically assaulted. Anti-Asian sentiment reached new highs as attacks on Asian Americans and their businesses escalated.
Harassment of Asian Americans is a long-standing issue in the US. But as we all know, since COVID-19 began, or even before, incidents have been nonstop and rising. We have all seen videos and footage of members of our APA community encountering racist attacks, from verbal abuse to physical assault.
Stop AAPI Hate reported over 9,000 anti-Asian incidents from March 2020 to June 2021. Of the total reported incidents, physical assaults increased from 10.8% in 2020 to 16.6% in 2021. Faced with these challenges, Asian American entrepreneurs do not stand idly by. Instead, they come together to take their fight to the streets, to the White House, and to the halls of Congress with the help of National ACE. National ACE brings together its 70 affiliate partners and organizations to support the passage of the Anti-AAPI Hate Crimes Act. President Biden invites National ACE to the White House to discuss the unprecedented challenges confronting the 2 million AAPI businesses and entrepreneurs it represents.
For centuries, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, diverse and vibrant communities have helped build this nation only to be often stepped over, forgotten, or ignored. We see you. And we are committed to stop the hatred and the bias.
More than anything else, I want to express my solidarity to the AAPI community and to let you know that this sort of racism and hatred have no place in our country. And certainly we on Team Biden stand with you and are going to do everything that we can in order to stand up for you and against any sort of racism and discrimination.
A year and a half after the start of this global pandemic, our Asian American small businesses are still struggling to recover. National ACE has partnered with many corporate sponsors to develop grant programs to support AAPI-owned businesses. The AAPI Strong Restaurant Fund, in partnership with Grubhub, provided $2 million for 195 AAPI restaurants severely impacted by the pandemic. In Arlington, Virginia, Jinari Thai was one of the restaurants to receive a $10,000 grant.
We've been treading water for the last 18 plus months during COVID-19, and this is going to help us immensely.
Il Chianti Italian restaurant in Henderson, Nevada was also a grant recipient.
I just want to thank you so much for the grant for National Asian Chambers, AAPI, and National ACE Grubhub grant, and we need it because we're struggling since last year. I just want to thank you all you guys for your support. Thank you.
Having conducted hundreds of trainings, workshops, and webinars, National ACE continues to support thousands of AAPI entrepreneurs by helping businesses with access to capital, contracting opportunities, and overcoming digital and language barriers. National ACE is preparing AAPI businesses to play a pivotal role in our nation's economic recovery.
National ACE has been a critical conduit for information and resources to the millions of AAPI business owners around the country.
Together with our corporate and nonprofit partners, National ACE is focused on combating the nationwide rise in AAPI bias, harassment, and violence in our small business communities across the country. Alone, we can do so little, but together, we can stand up for the future and success of our AAPI business communities. In these unprecedented times, it is clear that the spirit of the AAPI entrepreneur in America has not been crushed, but is now stronger than ever.
My name is Dalhyun Kilbasa, attorney CPA. I'm a managing partner of the law offices of Kilbasa, Holmes, and Ansong, and I am AAPI Strong.
I am Eugenia Henry. I am the president of H2O Clinical Research, LLC. I am AAPI Strong.
I am Congresswoman Michelle Steele. I am AAPI Strong.
Hi, my name is Ian So. I am the co-founder and CEO of Chicken and Rice Guys, and I am AAPI Strong.
Hi, I'm Tom Canaden. Hi, I'm Howard Duncan. And this is Boogie. And we are AAPI Strong.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Judy Chu, and together we are AAPI Strong.
Hello, my name is Steve Chen, the co-founder of YouTube. I'm AAPI Strong.
My name is Tiani Josu, and managing partner of Playground Capital. I am AAPI Strong.
My name is Andrew Chow, co-founder of Boba Guys. I am API Strong.
Hi, I'm Congressman Andy Kim. Together we are AAPI Strong.
I'm Angela Chang, the Chief Strategy Officer of my family business, KCAL Insurance Agency. I am AAPI Strong.
My name is Kaidi Tong, anchor and journalist at Pix 11 News in New York. I am AAPI Strong.
Together, we are AAPI Strong.
Thank you, Chris, for showing the video. So, I wanted to set up the conversation. AAPI Strong is a national initiative that's occurring throughout the country, and AAPI Strong California is our statewide initiative that's looking at opportunity to combat AAPI hate. And so I wanted to quickly go through a PowerPoint with you so that you have a better understanding about what the AAPI community represents and how we're going to be doing the work. So, Chris, can you go to the next slide? So just to kind of table set, the Asian community is not monolithic, right? We are made up of so many different ethnicities. We speak multiple languages, and as you can see here, the 6 top groups make up 85% of all Asian Americans, with Chinese being the largest group, and of course the Indian, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, and all others. And then more and more will becoming multiracial and mixed, right? So the multiracial, racial, and Hispanic are 14 and 3% respectively. And we speak more than 40 different languages, and more than 66% of all Asian American households have language other than English spoken in their home. Next slide. So the Census 2020, which just recently came out, and this is really important and significant, the US population has grown more diverse over the past decade as the populations of people that have identified as Hispanic and Asian has surged. And also the number of people who said they were more than one race has increased. And interestingly enough, the Asian population has grown the fastest, faster than expected, over 36% rise, nearly a fifth of the country's total, and projected to reach almost 46 million by the year 2060. This population is also the fastest growing racial or ethnic group, and by 2055, Asian Americans are projected to be the nation's largest immigrant group, surpassing Hispanics. So this is really a pivotal moment in our country in terms of diversity. Part of our population is aging and growing slowly, but people of color who are younger and are growing more rapidly represent the most significant growth for the United States. Next slide. So the percentage of AAPIs in California here, we are home to about 6 million of the population, and between 20 2000 and 2019, we grew by more than 2 million people. Our percentage of AAPIs in the California workforce, 47% of Asian Americans are married households, and they both have spouses in the workforce. And nearly 1 in 4 APIs are working but struggling with poverty. 37% are working but not struggling with poverty, and 40% are retired students or otherwise not working. And so that's the other myth I think that we want to combat, in that most folks are seeing the API community as very self-sufficient, highly educated, but when you peel back the onion, there's a significant population, about 3% that are of first immigrant, that still have challenges around poverty and a host of other issues that confront first immigrant communities. Next slide. So the COVID-19 related hate incidents in 13 weeks, and this is just the recent poll, respondents from California reported on over 832 incidents of COVID-19 related discrimination and harassment, averaging about 10 a day. And these reports reveal obviously a consistent pattern of anti-Asian hate in California. And we also have received additional reports. The Stop AAPI Hate nonprofit received other reports from 34 counties indicating that this is a statewide problem. Next slide. So types of discriminations that are occurring, about 30% have happened in folks' place of business. 63% of those types of anti-Asian hate have been reported by Asian women, or have been reported by Asian women. Youth have reported about almost 10% of the incidences, and seniors, 60 or older, have reported about 7% of the total incidents. Chinese seem to have reported more hate incidents than anybody else, and then followed by Koreans, Japanese, and Vietnamese. And of all hate incidents, 48% have included at least one hateful statement regarding anti-China or anti-immigrant rhetoric. Next slide. Chris, are you there? Okay. So the impact in terms of hate crime, 10% of the AAPI adults have experienced hate crime and hate incidents in 2021. The national average is 6%, 12% of Asian Americans and 10% of Pacific Islanders experienced hate incidents in 2020. The national average is 8%. In self-employment, Asians saw about a 5.8% decline in the first year after the pandemic began. This compares to about 2.2% of the total population. And then the US unemployment rate for Asian Americans was about at 5.8% in June, and over 9,000 incidences of hate crimes occurred between March 19 of 2020 and June 30th, 2021. And California had 38.6% of those incidences that were reported. So about 40% of the 9,000 happened here in California. Next slide. So we started the conversation by talking about the national initiative, and the video that you saw was from National ACE, which is the National API Chamber of Commerce that is leading this charge. They received close to $6 million in funding from various entities to develop a national campaign. So the AAPI Strong campaign really is centered around strength and unity versus hatred and division. And so it's really centered around the following program components. There's a big data piece to this. So a large part of the responsibility for the initiative is collecting the right type of data and be able to share that data with policymakers. A large part of it is around technical assistance and how to actually train not only bystanders to be able to report these incidences, but also, the folks themselves, the victims themselves, to be actually able to report these incidences without fear, because there's a huge fear to be able to report a lot of this. And then just bias and cultural sensitivity training that's occurring as well. And then we're really developing an advocacy strategy around getting a lot of our policymakers to really understand the impact, and having really robust discussions at the federal, state, and regional levels. Next slide. So here in California, what we're doing is we've raised about $250,000 towards the effort. The governor just signed a historic API equity budget. About $156 million is going towards this effort to combat racism and discrimination. And we're really hoping that we're going to be able to raise additional funding, because the data piece alone is a very expensive venture. Next slide. That's it. That's all I have to present. And so if there's any questions at this point, I'd be happy to take them.
And I do have a few questions that have been posted. So one of the things that was in the, one of the references in the video that you presented was the legislation, I believe, and I may have the name wrong, the anti-hate crime legislation relating to COVID. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that legislation does?
So it's really, it's a recognition that that they would like to recognize anything that's related to Asian hate as an actual crime in terms of race and an actual hate crime. And that would then be treated differently in the courts of law. And so one of the things, as I don't know if you recall or not, but in San Francisco recently, when there was a woman who was attacked, the police were reluctant to actually report it as a hate crime. They felt that it was just a random, by chance that she was targeted. And so what the legislation would do is really make anything that is focused on a particular Asian hate crime as an actual definition under what hate crime would be. And I don't know if there's actual resources that are going to be put to this, but I do know that it really is about how we characterize anti-hate as an actual hate crime.
And you had also mentioned some, I think, some recent budget at the state level. Do you believe there's a need for additional state or federal legislation or regulation, or is it more now a question of enforcement and education?
I think it's all of it, right? It's education, it's enforcement, but it's also resources. You know the 156 million. About 10 million of that's going to go out in the form of grants. And then there's just the different buckets of money that they're putting the 156 million into. But certainly we believe that it's really not going to be enough money to do a lot of the things that need to be done, because the 10 million that goes out as an example in the form of grants to community-based organizations like ours, what we're responsible for then is to do the actual education and training around these issues in our local communities. But if you think about all of the Chinatowns and all of the Japan towns and all of the Korea towns and all the little Saigons throughout California, I mean, that's a pretty heavy lift in terms of raising awareness and education and getting that training out there and starting to collect the data. So I think it is a resource question as well. But right now, we were successful in getting that amount set aside out of the governor's budget. So we're happy about that.
So one of the things you just said about Koreatown, Japantown, Chinatown, et cetera, kind of relates to a question that one of our attendees posted. That question is whether the diversity in the AAPI community also leads to fragmentation of efforts, and if so, how does either ACE or AAPI address that?
And that's a really good question, because there's at least 16 different ethnicities under the AAPI umbrella. In varying degrees, right? So there's a lot of folks that don't know the difference, at least that aren't Asian. They don't know the difference between if you're Chinese or Japanese or Korean or Vietnamese or Mien, right? And we all have our different cultures. We all have our different languages. And so that's why it's such a crucial effort to get the resources out there, because all of this has to be done in language, right? I mean, it has to be done in language. We aren't monolithic. We're not a monolithic community. And so part of this is really educating our own communities around culturally feeling safe enough to report these incidences to the authorities, but also then feeling safe enough as bystanders to be able to help and to feel safe enough to be able to report as well.
So, and let me say that because my questions are coming from just different sources, it may seem like they jump around a little bit. So another question kind of following up on what you were saying before about the legislation, how is it determined, how do the police or other law enforcement determine whether something is a hate crime? I mean, I think you had pointed out the woman being knocked down, purse stolen, but what are either in the reporting or how law enforcement addresses it, how is a hate crime determined?
That's a really good question, because I think that if there is a targeted, I think, effort by a perpetrator and comments made after those incidences occur, I think are really going to be important factors, right? So I think the targeting piece is going to be key to that. And, a lot of the hate crime that is occurring right now, particularly in people's places of business, there's a lot of graffiti, there's a lot of vandalism, there's a lot of just targeting, right? And so it's really as simple as that, right? That they're being singled out because of their race.
Are there places either in both, let's say in terms of California and in terms of the United States, where there have been greater number of hate crime incidents? Is it certainly, as I think your video or your presentation mentioned, the former president's comments weren't necessarily helpful in avoiding that sort of thing, but either in California or in the US, are there certain places that have greater number of incidents?
Yeah, I mean, in California, like I said, it's about 38%. And then it's New York, which is probably around, I want to say about 16%. And then it goes from there, and I do think it's really as a result of the fact that most of the AAPI community reside on the coast, in the coast. So they reside on the East Coast or the West Coast. A lot of them do. And there's very few of them in Middle America. I mean, there are clusters, but not as big as they are on each of the coasts. And then also down in the Texas area and in Houston and a lot of those areas as well. So we see a lot of incidences happen on the coast and in Texas, and then in a lot in Washington, in the Washington area as well.
What about changes in curriculum? Have there been changes, whether in California or elsewhere? Just changes in curriculum. And if not, are you or your group advocating for that?
Well, I think that the colleges have a recognition about the importance of the fact that the United States is becoming more diverse. And so I know, particularly here in Sacramento, California State University, Sacramento has a very strong, I would call it an affinity group, where they really bring together AAPI students, and there's special types of programs and, after campus events and, things that they do within the ethnic studies arena. So I do think that education is really critical to having folks have a better understanding of our differences. I think that, at the age of in kindergarten, our kids don't grow up to be racist. They don't. I mean, I think that our kids are colorblind. I think it's a learned behavior either from a either from where you live and your family to your environment to, all of those things. And so I think that the more that we can do to educate at a very early age, the differences in cultures and the acceptance of that, I think is extremely helpful, right? And so I always thought, wouldn't it be really cool if we actually required folks to spend a while in each other's shoes? Like, as an Asian American, maybe I need to spend a little time in the deep South, right, to have a better understanding of those challenges. And then, folks in the deep South come and spend some time, in our communities. And so I do think education is such a huge part of kind of, getting folks to really have better understanding about people, right?
So following up on that, are there programs along those lines, or are there suggestions you would have for non-Asian individuals to stop the hate?
I just think it's really centered around, there was a bunch of ethnic study courses that are optional in college. Maybe they need to make them, mandatory. I don't know, right? But there's a bunch of ethnic study courses that are already taking place. I do think what's important is just having conversations with our policymakers, having conversations with our community, and having real conversations about each other. And because fear-based politics, in my mind, which is really kind of what happened out of COVID-19 and the pandemic, and where it originated, and calling it the China virus. It reminded me of what happened when, during World War II, and, we were at war against Japan, and singled out the Japanese here in America because, they couldn't tell the difference if you were, a spy from Japan or whatever, and because it was so much easier. And yet they didn't do that to, German Americans, but they did it to Japanese Americans. And so we're just an easy target, we're an easy target. It's so much easier to shift blame and to do that. And we're an easy target for that. So I do think education is key to combating a lot of this stuff.
In terms of the Sacramento community, is the city or county of Sacramento or both working with your organization?
So, the city council has started, Councilmember Vang has started kind of these community discussions around this and what we might do collectively as a community to start to combat a lot of this. The county has not officially weighed in and done. I haven't seen any evidence from the county that they are really combating a lot of this, but I know that the city is really working on a program, and Councilmember Vang is leading that effort.
What would you say is your greatest challenge that AAPI Strong is facing, whether on the local, state, or federal level?
I think, it's really about getting the critical mass, right, to make change. And so, AT&T as an example has allowed, a texting service to try and get the word out. We're doing a whole bunch on social media. We're getting a lot of I don't know, because I'm old, but they call them influencers, social media influencers. A lot of AAPI social media influencers, entertainers, those types of folks are kind of starting to work towards the movement. But, this is just one small slice. We're not trying to boil the ocean. Our focus on the AAPI Strong Initiative is really centered around the effect that it's had on AAPI and our own businesses, right? And the reason why it's been so much of a focus for us is because right before the AAPI hate started to rear its ugly head, we had really a difficult time around the COVID piece, because as soon as you had administration say that it was the China virus, we saw immediate effect on a lot of our AAPI businesses back in January of 2020. When California started to shut down in March of 2020, we had started to feel that effect back in January. So those businesses have had 18 months of pandemic-related, stress. Plus, you layer on AAPI hate on top of that. So our focus is really around how do we get our AAPI businesses healthy, right? What can we do around that?
And there's just briefly, one of the attendees has raised her hand. I would ask you to post your question in the chat, which I think would be easier than unmuting, et cetera, based on our system. Another question in terms of AAPI, I think some of the presentation talked about working with other groups, working with other minorities, and specifically one of the people who posted the question asked about whether you're also working with Native American groups.
There's a Native American Chamber of Commerce here, the state Native American Chamber of Commerce. We reached out to them. We reached out to the Hispanic Chamber. We reached out to the Black Chamber, because I think that, as many folks as we can get to rally around, this issue, I think is going to be really, really helpful, right?
And I'm looking briefly to see if we have more questions. Are there additional things? You've done a wonderful presentation. And I actually noticed, because I cheated a little bit and looked at some other aspects of your bio, that you've set up various local business groups. It looks like a Sacramento Export Center and a Small Business Transportation Resource Center, which seems to be across several state lines. So if my notes are correct, could you tell us a little bit more about each of those enterprises?
Well, yeah, I think that people say, why should an ethnic chamber exist? I mean, the color of business is green, right? What's special about having an Asian chamber and a Black chamber and a Hispanic chamber? Why not just a chamber? And I actually asked that question when I first started on this career path, because I have to tell you guys, I was in retail for many, many years. And when I got married, I came back to Sacramento and actually had an identity crisis. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life? And, this little advertisement came across my desk that basically said, there's this Asian Chamber of Commerce is looking for a database publisher person, something like that. I don't remember what it was. Anyway, I thought, well, my husband's business he's Asian. He has an Asian business, and this is an Asian chamber. I should get the two together. And that's kind of how I started this career at the Asian Chamber. And then I realized when you get into this work, what happened is in I think it was in the early 90s, Proposition 209, which did away with affirmative action at the state level. In the past, a lot of the state could start to actually track the kind of contracts they gave based on ethnicity, right? But when Proposition 209 passed, you could no longer do that. And that's really the reason why the Ethnic Chamber was formed. It was really to make sure that any Asian business had an opportunity to still contract with the state. And so all of the programs that we have under my umbrella are really about opening up access and opening opportunity for minority businesses. And it's important work, because minority businesses, we speak different languages. English may not be our first language. We're not as sophisticated in terms of how to network and how to make the right connections in order to get that next job, right? We don't necessarily have we don't have those deep pockets in terms of having a healthy balance sheet, right? Because you have to have a healthy balance sheet in order to be able to grow your business. And so a lot of the things that keep these minority businesses small, we try to remove those type of barriers to help them grow. and help them really start to get into more of the, the opportunities that a lot of other businesses have that maybe they take for granted. So that's what we do. So all the centers that you referenced is really our attempt, and we get paid by the feds and the state to do this, to try and open up opportunities for minority businesses where they wouldn't necessarily have them, right? So that's really what we do.
So you mentioned those two centers. Do you see a need for additional centers for development, growth, education in the business, Asian AAPI business community?
I think that what's really important is that folks have to have the understanding that it's not a level playing field. And so when you start a little bit behind, right, what are the policies? What are the strategies that we can do as policymakers, that we can do as folks that are in leadership positions? How can we help move the football further down the field? So for us, it really is trying to connect our communities to more opportunities. So in the Sacramento region, as an example, we've identified that the next industry clusters are going to be in the mobility space, in the ag tech space, in all of these new next economy clusters. And then our job would be then to better connect our minority communities to those opportunities and identify the gaps in that capacity, in that building of that capacity, in order to be able to do that. And so that's what we do. And so if you're asking, do we need more help in that area? Absolutely. Do we need more resources? Absolutely. Because I started this presentation by saying that the world's changing, that the demographics of the US are changing dramatically. We're going to be a majority minority. We already are community. The city of Sacramento met that threshold. The state has met that threshold. Now, the United States is going to go that way, right? And so unless we have a real plan or solution to help these underserved minority communities get to a level of that all of us, an economic development level that all of us can be proud of, we're going to continue to struggle as a communities, right? We'll have to pay for it somehow. As a chamber executive, I believe in viewing these folks as assets, not liabilities. And so that requires different strategies. The asset side of the balance sheet requires different strategies. And so it's not a subsidy strategy, it's an investment strategy, right?
Does AAPI ever make political endorsements?
You mean my chamber?
Well, whether it's AAPI or the chamber itself, in terms of endorsing either candidates or specific propositions on a ballot.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So here's it may be a tough question. What would success look like for AAPI or the different efforts that you're helping to support and develop?
Well, I think that we're about 15% of the population here in California, and that actually mirrors the region. So if you take a look at the 50%, and we're actually 15% of business ownership here in the region and in the state. But if you take a look at the health of those businesses in comparison to non-Asian business, we have a ways to go, right? So how do you grow that segment? Again, how do you make the right investment in that segment so that it can fully participate in California's economy and in its next economy? So success to me would be the recognition that we can get that 15% in a healthier clip and more investment and have it really be fully participatory in California's growing economy. That's what success would be for me. And so whatever those barriers are to removing that, including AAPI hate, that's what we have to do, right? We have to educate. We have to make sure that the right policies are in place. and the right investment and resources in that.
So perhaps one last question, and it relates to maybe the first question I asked. Is there legislation pending on either the state or federal level that you would want to tell us about that would help further the policies and development that you just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, we just authored a bill, AB 915, that died in committee, and it went to suspense, and it was because our legislator didn't make it a priority, because the real truth about it is, and I'm sure we've got a lot of people here that are on the call that have been retired folks that used to work at the Capitol. I mean, you understand how all this works, a little horse trading, and you've got to author a bill, and they say which bill is most important for you to get out of suspense. Well, our bill wasn't, but our bill, AB 915, really was an attempt to codify the governor's executive order that would allow for all state agencies to make sure they report out what their spend was for small businesses, right? Right now, it's a good faith effort, but there's nothing that occurs if they don't hit their targets. And so our bill, AB 915, was really an attempt to make sure that people were reporting out, what their spend was for small businesses and minority small businesses, but it didn't make it out. So, if you're asking how you guys can help, just, call me. I can get you guys to write tons of letters.
We will keep that in mind. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn the controls, as it were, back to Dave, who I think has some concluding comments.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Pat. I've certainly learned a lot. We would like to offer you a 1-year honorary membership in the Renaissance Society. As you may know, we have a lot of programs here, individual as well as seminars. So looking forward to that. We'd also like to make a donation on your part to the Seth Nelson Student Emergency Grant Fund. There's a lot of kids that sometimes just have to have some money quickly, and we like to help them out in that case. Okay, today's presentation was recorded. You can view it either 2 separate ways: on the Renaissance Society Forum channel on YouTube or on the Renaissance website. Okay, so next week, we've got Judge James Mize. Judge Mize is a Superior Court judge in Sacramento. He has served the presiding judge for the entire court system. The judge also, excuse me, the judge also has taught over 100 courses and seminars to attorneys and judges in the areas of family law, domestic violence, and legal ethics. He will also answer such pressing questions as, can I appear in a Zoom court in my pajamas? And here's one I think many of you may recognize. Can I continue operating on my patient while at a Zoom traffic hearing? I think we all remember that happening. Okay, so with that, that is the end of our presentation. Hope to see you next week.